first thing that's probably worth noticing is that you're all muted. So from the very beginning, some people are often a little worried that we'll be able to hear everything you say and every sniff and every sneeze and cough. But don't worry about that. You're all muted for the moment. There is the option for me to unmute people. So what we will do throughout the webinar is allow you to take some, ask some questions if that's what you'd like to do. And you'll also have the opportunity to do that. You'll see that there's a question box there that you can do that. So I'll keep a bit of an eye on that. And so you might not be able to see what I'm doing, but you may see my mouse moving around the screen in front of you. And that's there to make sure that I'm running the webinar from my control panel, and I'm checking out those questions and seeing what people are doing and what people are saying and what they're up to. One of the other functions that you'll be able to see is there's a hand up function. So you'll see on the little dashboard on the left-hand side of your dashboard, there's a hand, and you can use that hand to be able to let me know that you'd really like to say something or ask something, and I'll keep an eye out for that. And so one of the things that you might like to do even right now is just to give me an idea that we've actually got off to some sort of a reasonable start. Use that hand button. You can put your hand up. You can put your hand down again. So grab your mouse and put your hand up or put your hand down, and I'll be able to see that you're hearing me and everything's under control. Fantastic. Holly, thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Margaret, Senka, really great. I can see lots of people around the place. Good on you, Kaylee. Thank you. Lots of people who are letting me know that they're on board. They're hearing what's happening, and you can let other people know that that you've got something to contribute at some stage during the webinar. And I'll try to get to those, try to keep a bit of an eye on it. What I'll also do is use that question box. So you'll see that there's a section there where you can write questions, and I'll keep an eye on that throughout the webinar, but with the intention, I guess, not of stopping and starting too much on you, but in making sure that we maybe leave a little bit of time at the end for some questions, and hopefully that works out really well for you. So I really hope this is a valuable session for you. One of the things you may have noticed is that in the reminder emails that were coming through about this webinar was that we gave you the opportunity to download a couple of files in preparation. Now, first thing is, don't panic if you happen to have forgotten to do that. You don't get excluded from the webinar for not doing your homework. But one of the two files that we've given you the link to be able to download, first of all, is the individual behaviour plan format. That's in Word format. And you can use that, you can download that, you can save it, you can begin using that format immediately in your school. And in fact, you are most welcome to do so. So if you haven't got that done already, then it's worth a look. You don't need it right now, so but it's worth grabbing hold of. People who do have it in front of them now, you might be thinking about a particular student right now that you'd like to make some notes on as we work our way through that plan. And the other one is the IBP instructional guide. So it's another very much written in plain English, very strong determination around making sure that making sure that it's really clear for you how you can build this IBP, because as we know, there's too many IBPs that get written in schools around Australia, and far too many of them end up on shelves gathering dust or clogging up servers on your system because they're just not engaged with. So this needs to be a really simple way for you to be able to get some traction with those students that, if we're quite honest about it, they're the ones that are keeping us up at night. And as we mentioned in the blurb about this webinar today, that where the research tells us that these are somewhere between 3 to 5% of your students who are actually taking up somewhere in the vicinity of 50 to 80% of your individualised instruction, which really isn't good enough. Now, the truth is we're never going to get that down to 3 to 5% and make it an even share. But what we do need to accept is that there's some inequality there, and that's not exactly the way that we want this to work, and it's not the way we want to differentiate our instruction. So it's really important that we have a plan for getting somewhere. So that's kind of the idea behind it. So the way that the webinar works today, and so we'll get cracking. I'm hoping that you can see the screen and that's going to work for you. So what I want to do is, I guess, to welcome everybody today. The first people that I'd really like to welcome, we've got our partners, first of all. So we have schools all around Australia and rural schools that are partners, and today we have partners who are joining us from 6 different states and territories in Australia, and we also have some people who are checking us out from New Zealand, so welcome aboard to those people as well. I also want to welcome our members. Every month our members get some resources and that around teacher practice, and they get some resources around cultural leadership. They also get a bit of a video also, because the one thing that's really special about our partners and members is that they understand that this is a very small part of it. And while I certainly hope that today the IBP format provides you with an oasis, one little wonderful space, and one little bit of traction and one little bit of improvement with those cherubs that keep you up late at night. I want to acknowledge that the oasis certainly sits in a desert. And it's our partners and members who really understand that that's doing something about the desert that really makes the big difference. And so welcome aboard to everybody. And I hope that today, certainly the intention is to provide a very genuine oasis, a spot in the shade, because things are really difficult, and hopefully give you something that you can get some improvement on straight away. A lot of people might be wondering, with this being our first webinar, who I am, and the truth is that I founded Real Schools 2.5 years ago now, after I'd been working in my last day job in this place. And this is actually a photo that I took at a Rosebery Primary School, and we have I think we have a couple of people from Rosebery on board today on the webinar, which is fantastic. And so my background is as a teacher, then also as a behaviour and wellbeing coordinator, an assistant principal, and then a principal. And so this, I guess, if we're really honest about it, this photo was taken the day we opened Rosebery Primary School, and this is my desert. So this was the whole landscape that we confronted, and it was really about knowing straight away that we didn't know who they were, but there were 3 to 5% of the students in here that were going to take up an inordinate amount of our time. And so what we wanted to do was to get really clear straight away about identifying them and then being able to build some improvement and some traction. So there was a strong determination at this point about finding out where our areas were that we were certainly going to build an oasis. So the next question then would be, who are you? So what I thought I might do right now is find out a little bit about who are the people that we have joining the webinar today. So I'm going to launch a poll for you now. I'm just going to ask you to choose, just to tell us which hat you're wearing today, I guess. So because I want to be able to tailor today to make sure that you get your needs met, and that whether you're coming from the perspective of a teacher or a school leader or a parent or another role within a school, that I can allow that info to sort of impact the webinar today. So I'm going to launch a poll, and I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to make sure that you grab your laptop and you let us know what it is that you are, what hat it is that you're wearing. Fantastic. Okay, I'll close that poll off, and I'll share the results with you. So we can see there that we've got 71% of the people here today are classroom teachers. So that's really that's really exciting for me, because you're the people who need to take charge of this process. And one of the things that's hugely important is that teachers understand that sometimes we sit around as teachers and we wait for an IBP to come along, and then we wait for someone to let us know that they're ready to review it. And it really is a process that must be teacher driven. So I'm really excited to have so many teachers on board today. That's really great to know. In getting to work and having a look at where an IBP needs to fit within your school, I guess where the oasis fits within the desert, it's worth knowing that I guess what I'm referring to today is 3 to 5% of your students who will require some sort of an individual intervention. Now, there undoubtedly are going to be people online today who are saying to me, oh yeah, you haven't been to our school. It's more than 3 to 5% where we are. The truth is that every school has its 3 to 5%, and I would like to recommend to you that you begin with that 3 to 5%. So whether you're in a school where there is minimal behaviour issues, or whether you're in a school where there are significant behaviour issues, starting with the pointy end 3 to 5% and getting some traction there before you look to expand is really important. I wouldn't recommend any of you go away and start to build IBPs for more than that, because it is going to be one of those things that, look, an IBP can be a hugely valuable thing, but it can also be a drain on your time. if it's the only thing that you're paying attention to. So my fervent advice is to start with 3 to 5%, which means you're looking at, in most class sizes around Australia, you're looking at around 1, maybe 2 students in each class or in each homeroom group who it's worth having some sort of individual intervention for. If you feel it's manageable, if you feel this is something that can work for you and you can expand beyond that, then by all means do so. Beneath that fits probably that group of 12 to 15% of students, and we've written our August articles for our members this week around this particular cohort who sort of tend to vie for the crown. So you might get some blessed relief from the top 3 to 5% occasionally because they might have a day off, or they might even leave the school, but then we find that there's a cohort behind them who elevate and look to fill that gap in the social hierarchy. So it's worth thinking about also having something built in both at a policy and a practice level about what you're doing to address those students. So they often come through in themes. So for some schools, it might be angry boys, it might be physical aggression, it might be the bitchy girl syndrome that can sometimes pervade our schools. And it's worth making sure that we're aware of those themes and we have some interventions that work. And then it's really important to have some sort of classroom management plan in place around the school that is basically described in a really succinct way. I don't think a CMP should be any larger than 1 page. And I think in 1 page that teachers can start to list the reactive and also the proactive strategies that they use and see what the balance is. And if we can achieve some sort of reasonable balance around there, then we'll know that our pedagogy is consistent. And then when people can have a look at each other's CMPs, they can get certainly some whole school consistency, which can be of real benefit. So today we're looking at the IBPs, and that is very much about our pointy end kids. All right, so we'll get started. So the people that do have their plan in front of them, you'll notice that there's several boxes in there. So when you're getting started, it's really important to just get that basic information down, including dating the IBP and making sure that we've got all the most common information there that'll allow you to save it as its individual file, and then you'll also be able to save it as an ongoing file once it's been reviewed. My strong suggestion to you is that you never ever handwrite an IBP. So it'll make the process of reviewing it much easier if you're able to make sure that you have a facilitator. And so when we talk about who's in the room in getting started, we're talking about having one person who facilitates the building of the IBP. So as the classroom teachers, as we've got 71% of people in the webinar today who are teachers, I don't want you to facilitate that meeting. So what we're looking for is a coordinator, an assistant principal, a principal, a special ed teacher who can take some responsibility for just running the meeting and just having that file open on a laptop and recording it. So the facilitator's role is to keep everybody on track in the meeting, and the other people who you want in the meeting would be the classroom or homeroom or pastoral care teacher. You definitely want a parent. Now, a lot of people look at an IBP format and go straight back to school and say, great, I'm going to run an IBP process for a particular student who's driving me a bit crazy. And look, often is the case as we're working with parents who are challenging that the parent's behaviour can be something that we either avoid or we're confronted by also. I just can't emphasise strongly enough to you that getting parents on side through the IBP is a really valuable thing to do. So I've run IBP meetings in my office as a principal, absolutely. I've run them in the car park. I've run them in homes. I've run them sitting under trees to make sure that I've found a way to engage parents and to get them involved in this process. And as I'll point out shortly, there's a couple of key markers in this plan that will hopefully allow you to get parents on side and remove some of that conflict that can often sit around that relationship between the school and the parents of the students who are giving us the hardest time. For secondary teachers who are on the webinar today, sometimes you will make a decision about whether to include the student in the plan or not. There'll be times when there'll be some sensitive information come up which you might feel might make it worse for the student, but there'll also be times when you'll think that it might be valuable to have them there. Kids, particularly around the year 9 mark, can get a little bit that, if there's a secret meeting held discussing them, they can be really uncomfortable with that, and therefore therefore, no matter what the plan is that we put together, it can be too uncool for them to engage with. So you'll make a professional call about whether it's appropriate to have a student involved in that plan. I wouldn't suggest filling the room with extra people. So you may have a really significant teacher attached, so that might be a special ed teacher or a tutor or somebody who's been directly supporting or working with that student, but it's certainly not important to get the faculty or anybody like that together. And the main reason around that is we want to make sure that the parent feels really comfortable to engage fully in the process. They will be the people who have the most to offer in that circumstance, so it's important that we maximise their comfort. The next section is that personal detail. So in getting started, it's about considering what those personal details are that are filled in, and that's important in making sure that the IBP evolves as a document. You've got a record that can then be reviewed really easily. And once you actually start to document it, it's really important that the parent sees that this is being documented. This isn't just one more get together for a chat. And this isn't one more get together where we do a little bit of, we get those shame responses sometimes where schools are telling parents, if only you did a bit of this at home, this would be so much better. And parents are saying, if only you did a bit of this at school, he'd be so much better. We don't want the conversation to get loose and informal like that. We want parents to know that this is a really important document. And by having a facilitator that completes it electronically, we can definitely emphasise that. So that's a really important thing to do. The only one box, if I can just flick back for a second, the only one box that I would ask you not to fill out when you're filling in the personal details at the start is the review date. Because as we work through here, we're going to make some professional decisions about what a reasonable review date is. So don't fill that in at the start. That's one that we're going to return to at the end. The first thing we want to start to consider is an overall aim. So far too often when we build IBPs, we fall for the trap of starting to talk very specifically about the behaviours that we're worried about. We're going to get to that in a minute. But what we do want to do is to get really clear about where's this taking us? Why would the reason be that we're going to write an individual behaviour plan for a student? So we want to start to think about what are the broad goals, what's the big picture of where we're trying to take this student? Indeed, which version of themselves do we want this student to be? So this is where we're starting to think, even in terms of 3 to 5 years ahead, what are we hoping that by taking these first steps around an IBP, what kind of person, what kind of student, what kind of learner, what kind of young adult indeed, what might this person become as a result of us taking this trajectory? So this gets us away from the idea of making sure that we just want them to stop hitting people and saying that what we're actually looking for is the opportunity to say, okay, in 3 to 5 years, what we'd like them to do is to be able to have a functioning small group of social friends, or what we'd like them to do is to have generally strong and productive relationships with staff. What we like them to do is to become more employable as they start to step out of the school environment. What we'd like them to do is to be able to transfer good learning and good engagement behaviours to various contexts outside of school. So we really need to look long term because we need to choose behaviours that will help us achieve that overall aim. So that's a really important step to take there, is to think hard about what would be the version of a student in 3 to 5 years that we're wanting them to be. And so that's a really important step to take. So once we've got to there, the tricky bit with these kids is sometimes to say, okay, the strengths and the interests that we have. So what we want to do is to, as we know intuitively in working with people, that people respond when we come from a position of strength. So you can probably think for a moment about somebody who, for instance, has, somebody on your staff who's really hard work, and so they might be really arrogant, and they might be really difficult to deal with in staff meetings because they know best in all situations. And if you come at that person and say after a staff meeting and say, hey, we really probably need to deal with your arrogance here, you're probably not going to get the most wonderful response from them. And it's because they don't view themselves as being arrogant. They probably view themselves as being confident and or forthright and words like that. And so we need to think about what are the strengths that people have and to use that as a platform to be able to get a change in behaviour. So it's 3 questions that are really important here when we're filling out this box that's titled Strengths and Interests. What is the student good at? So what is it that they have had a level of success with? What does the student like doing? So there's sometimes things that they're into, but they're not particularly capable at it. So I've had examples where we've had even quite aggressive boys who have some, they just have an interest in dance, or they might have an interest in the performing arts, or they might have an interest in music, but it just hasn't been explored because the peer group has constantly pulled them aside, pulled them towards sport. And so what we're looking for is what are the things that we know that they like doing, and then what is it that we like about them. Now, this can sometimes be a really tricky situation because I've run IBP meetings where we've sat down and asked both a parent and a teacher, what do you like about this young person? And we've even had some tears well up at this stage because the question is so difficult to answer. And because most of the time our focus and indeed what we're dealing with is the negatives, but it's hugely important that we start to look at what is it that we do admire about them. One thing that often shines through when we're talking about strengths and interests, even with our most challenging students, is that often responsibility is something that we like about them. We've got regular situations where we might have year 6 to 8 boys who are quite aggressive, but for some reason they're not. Sorry, I'm just looking. It's got a question from Mandy that I'm going to have a look in. We're watching it together. Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks, Mandy. Great to know. But one of the things we find out about that we like about these students is that they're really good with younger students. So if you send them off to work in a quiet environment with the year ones to do a little bit of reading with some kids who are struggling, all of a sudden they do that really well. So, and we really tend to admire that quality of being able to show some empathy for a young kid or to show some compassion. So we've got to dig deep. We've got to dig really deep to be able to work out what it is that we like about these students, to get a comprehensive list of what it is that we really value about them. And we're going to use, this is a really important box because we're going to use this box to be able to, this is going to be our box full of fishhooks. So we're going to use one of these fishhooks, or indeed if we can 2 or 3, to be able to hook the young person's motivation into a behavioural improvement through this plan. The next box, sitting side by side, is the behaviours causing concern. And as you can imagine, when you first begin to write an IBP, you will find that this box is very easy to fill. In fact, as you go, you'll see that the strengths and interest box can often be a bit threadbare, and there's not much there. But the behaviours causing concern box, we can go forever and ever listing them, and so we should. So what we want to do in this box is to get really explicit about what are the behaviours that are causing us concern, and we want to be able to make sure that they are observable behaviours. So what I mean by that is they can be seen and or heard. So what we do not want is to write things in the IBP such as being silly. Because to be honest, I don't know what you mean by being silly. You don't know what the parent is interpreting as being silly, and the student most definitely doesn't know what being silly is. There needs to be something that we can see and or that we can hear very specifically. So even statements such as hurting others is something that I don't want you to put in there. We want to know, does this student kick, pinch, bite, scratch, push, throw things at people? We want to get really, really specific about what it is that they do, because indeed we want to be able to know when those behaviours both are increasing, and we want to know when they're disappearing as well. Sometimes if we can target one aggressive behaviour and bring it down, we'll get a reduction in others by osmosis, and I'll refer to that in just a moment too. But that only happens when we get clear about one particular behaviour. So I did have a situation recently where we had the teacher said to me that the behaviour causing concern was occasional inappropriate language. And I had to pry, I had to get the shovel out and dig a little deeper on that. And basically there was one particularly vulgar phrase that this young bloke was using for just about everybody. And I won't repeat it over a webinar today, but we wrote it. We wrote it in the plan because this was a specific behaviour that we were not going to understand, nor would anybody else reading this plan, unless we were really explicit about it. So it's really important to get really clear about what the behaviours are that are causing concern. Now, for the people who have gone to the trouble of downloading the individual behaviour plan template, you probably noticed that there's one particular quirk in this plan, is that, while there's a series of boxes and it's a very simple Word document and there's no frills about it because we don't want to confuse anybody with this plan, you probably noticed that these are the last two boxes are the only two that sit side by side in the plan. So there's a reason for that, and I'm just wondering if you might have picked up on what it is as we go. This is our metric. So for me, there are far too many individual behaviour plans that have no success measure, and therefore we lose all motivation for it. The teacher loses motivation, the facilitator, school leaders, and also the parent lose motivation for being for getting onto the plan, and certainly for reviewing it and for continuing the momentum and the traction that you get. So this is our measure. So what we'll see is that we'll have teachers who will, what we'll see if we keep these boxes side by side, is that over time we should be able to see the strengths and interest box increase in volume of things that we find out about the student, that they're doing well, that they like about themselves and that we like about them. And we're also going to see an improvement in terms of a reduction of those behaviours causing concern as we start to address them. And if I can tell you that getting parents on side, as you know, is just a critical thing. And if the parents can see that when we print the first version of the IBP and then print the second version, if they can see that there's been an increase in the strengths and interests and a decrease in the behaviours causing concern, their buy-in goes through the roof. And this is where this can be an incredibly valuable document for you. So really important to keep those boxes side by side, because it's our measure of whether the behaviour plan is making a big difference or not. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is to get really specific about one target behaviour. So like I said, we need to be really explicit about that behaviour, and but it's also really important that, this is where, to be honest, teachers, 71% of you today are teachers, and this is the truth. If the truth be known, nearly every teacher that I sit with here says, "Oh, can I just have a couple more?" And there's a trap involved in that. So we need to make sure that we get really clear about one behaviour. It's not one behaviour that the parent chooses. It's not one behaviour that we think will help the student the most. It's the behaviour that the teacher, the homeroom teacher, the pastoral care teacher, wants gone the most. So I always tell people that target behaviour time is Christmas Day for our teachers. They need to imagine every single one of those behaviours causing concern as presents under the tree, and they get to open one. They get to pick one where we're going to get some success. I'll allow two only when there's a very distinct link between them. So if you were going to choose hitting and kicking, I might let you off the hook if you got me on a good day. But if you're going to choose hitting and calling out, then I would suggest to you that that's not going to work. We need to get really clear about which behaviour it is that we're going to seek improvement in, and then we need to go hard at that one. And so that means that there'll be several other behaviours in that box about behaviours causing concern that we're not specifically addressing at the moment. We're still continuing with our strategies that we use to both respond and react in those circumstances, but we're targeting improvement in one particular behaviour. Now, as I've written on this slide here, it's important to relax at this point. So teachers will sometimes get really upset that we can only pick one. There's so much to work on. The great news is that as we build success in, and I think you'll agree that so many of the students that we work with who struggle with behaviour, we've worked on it with them for such a long time that all they've experienced is failure around their own behaviour. All they've experienced is our negative responses to their behaviour. So what we're looking for is a little hint of traction that's positive about their behaviour. If we can do that with one particular behaviour, the great part is that by some sort of osmosis, we usually end up with other behaviours starting to improve. And so that's great, and so we get a little bit of success by accident as we go along, and that behaviours causing concern box just starts to minimise. So I can just see the question there from Michelle about having the doc available. We're going to make sure you get that, Michelle. It's downloadable at the free stuff section under Real School on the Real School's website under Behaviour Management. So if there is anyone else who's looking to do a quick download while they're on the webinar, know that if you head to realschools.com.au, then you'll be able to look under Behaviour Management in the free stuff tab, and you'll be able to download those documents while we're going today. Rightio, let's keep trucking. It's really important to think about the antecedents and triggers that are at play for these students. Most behaviours don't, and in fact, what the research tells us about the way that we behave is that it almost never happens in any sort of young person or even in ourselves that a behaviour happens in isolation for absolutely no reason. That there's a pretty simple little ABC that we can consider where A is an antecedent or a condition or an event that has occurred in someone's lives, B is the behaviour, and C is the consequence of that behaviour. And it keeps looping. We get kids who are either on a positive loop, so their behaviour goes upwards. They might, for instance, get up in the morning and they've had a really good night's sleep. That's an antecedent. They come to school and they experience something successful. That's great. And the consequence is that their confidence goes through the roof. So they go home that night ready to sleep really well again and with not too much negative on their mind, and they loop upwards and upwards and upwards. It can also happen in the negative. So that means that there are events and conditions in our lives, such as, for instance, coming to school with no sleep, but also something can happen which can trigger that particular target behaviour that we're worried about. So one when we talk in really plain language about what the antecedents and triggers are, kids who are aggressive, the number one behaviour that we're finding for kids who trigger aggressive behaviours is somebody touching my stuff. So somebody who tries to, take a pencil or to take something out of their school bag or, use their iPad without permission, that's a very, very common trigger for behaviours that are aggressive. But you will get students who you need to think hard about this target behaviour, and we do need to think about what are the conditions in which that behaviour is more likely to occur, and then we're going to try and avoid those conditions. You can't always, but we're going to do whatever we can to try and build some success. So sometimes that behaviour might be that they behave incredibly badly in non-contact time classes in primary schools. So they're good with you, but whenever you send them to another teacher, they're absolutely hopeless. And so we might avoid the one non-contact period that week where it doesn't work out too well and find something else for them to do. They might be really good in the classroom, but the calling out only happens when they're sitting next to a particular student. So we're not going to sit them next to that particular student. So we're going to look for what are the triggers and the antecedents that facilitate that behaviour, and then just do our maximum to ensure that the young person doesn't achieve them. We're going to have a little moral dilemma here, because we're going to say to ourselves occasionally, or you might even hear a colleague say to you, boy, shouldn't they just be able to sit next to Jimmy on the floor and do the right thing? And the truth is they should, but they can't. And placing them next to Jimmy and overexposing them to failure with their behaviour is something that you're going to find is reinforcing their behaviour. So what we want to do is to set them up for success as often as we can. And once we're getting some successful traction and pattern happening, then we're able to scaffold them into more difficult situations, more challenging situations. All right, the next box is about major supports. So what that's about is that we want to be able to look at what's the big picture for this student. And as we often know, so many of these kids who we would consider in our 3 to 5% most pointy have something big going on in their lives. Sometimes it's physiological, sometimes it's chemical, sometimes it can be diagnosed, sometimes there's some trauma at play, sometimes there's been some history, sometimes there's family unrest. And it's really important that we find out, as much as the family is prepared to share with us, what's the big picture. Now, I do call some schools that I work with change the heading of this box and they might call it the big picture, but I'm really intent on calling it major supports myself, mainly because we're trying to identify not only the issues, we're trying to identify who are the key people who are supporters for this young person. And so it might be even sometimes be an uncle or a grandparent or a neighbour, and we want to be able to identify that they're a key person, because the disappearance of that major support sometimes can be an antecedent to negative behaviour drift. So this really helps us build a strong positive profile of what's happening with this young person, and that can be hugely valuable to us. We, as an aside, we did do an IBP once in a school that I was working in, where a young fella had joined us, and for 6 months he'd been with us, and his teacher eventually asked me, could we build an IBP for him? And she was right to do so, because we'd had just occasional outbursts, quite aggressive and violent outbursts from him. Most of the time he was right as rain, but occasional outbursts, and we couldn't get a handle on them. They sometimes would occur, and then he'd have a few weeks where everything was fine, and then we'd get 2 or 3, and then that'd be fine. We couldn't work out what was going on. And we discovered through actually asking the question to his family, has there been any background that we should be aware of, that he'd actually discovered his own father who had suicided, and he'd had half a counselling session as a response. This had happened to him as an 8-year-old, and we had him arrive in our school as an 11-year-old, and that certainly impacted strategy. So when we're talking now about strategy and what we're going to do, we certainly weren't about to talk about classroom strategy at this point. It was about accessing him to the support that he needed to get past the really significant barriers in his life. So that's a really important box too. Then we want to start to list the short-term and the classroom strategies, I guess. So the things that we're going to do in the classroom that are going to help us get an improvement. And the first thing is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to look at what is it that's already working. So as an example, there'll be certain students who you can be really indirect with. You might give them a hint that they should go and get a drink of water now. And there are some students who you need to get very direct with, and you need to be able to make eye contact and give them the order that they need to leave the classroom for 5 minutes and not return until that 5 minutes is up. So it's about talking about our voice volume. It's about talking about whether you're using any strategies such as buddy classes or rewards of any type. Rewards is an interesting conversation that I won't go too in depth into today, but extrinsic rewards is something that there's a lot of debate around. Extrinsic rewards are incredibly useful for bringing a target behaviour to attention, not so good for reinforcing it long term. So the example that probably works in some worlds that gives you a good example of that would be that we can some bosses will bring in a Christmas bonus, and everybody gets really excited about that. We might work really hard for a few weeks, but then the next year it really isn't changing behaviour. And in fact, the only way that it can change behaviour is if the boss removes that extrinsic reward, and there's all sorts of uproar about where's our Christmas bonus. So what we're looking for is to get kids off extrinsic rewards and motivated by intrinsic rewards. And my rule for that would be the 3 R's. So that's about reinforce them extrinsically at the beginning regularly, then randomly, and then rarely, and be very explicit about doing it that way. And what we're going to do now is that once we've got that base, I guess, of strategies that work with a particular student, is we're going to come up with one new strategy only. So this isn't about restarting and going over again. We're going to come up with one new strategy only that's going to be designed very deliberately to improve the target behaviour. Now, if there are any people here in the webinar today who are a little around my age, you would be familiar with this vehicle. This is the DeLorean from Back to the Future. It was a very impressive time machine, and so it seemed very ridiculous in the movie that you could take an odd sports car from the 80s and hook it up with these incredible lights and equipment and then be able to get it to a certain speed and transform in time. Well, this is where this IBP format is a little bit different and it's a little bit like the DeLorean, because the DeLorean had one key aspect to it, and it was called a flux capacitor. And that was one particular odd little part of the engine with this little tri-spoke kind of thing. And what it was the key to the whole thing. So to be honest, this is the key to the whole IBP format that I'm showing you today. Is what we're looking to do now is to take that target behaviour. We're going to look for a measure of improvement, and we're going to look for a reward for achievement that's going to come from within their strengths and interests. So the way that works is that, to give you an example of that, we had a student in a school where I was principal who was a Year 2 lad, and his target behaviour was staying in class. So what his teacher was telling me was that out of, as an example, the 15 learning sessions that she was running during the week, morning, middle of the day, after lunch, it was about 6 of those where he was actually successful in staying in class. It was usually about 9 that he had run out of the classroom at some stage. So as you can imagine, that's a behaviour that's not only impacting his learning, it's driving his teacher crazy. So we wanted to target that behaviour. So the target behaviour that we put in there was staying in class. A measure of improvement was that we wanted to take the target from 6 out of 10 successful to 9 out of 10 successful. So we needed to improve it by 3. This was really important. Your targets here, your measures here, should be stretch targets, but targets that stretch them but not snap them. So if we set the target of staying in class every session of all week, we know full well what the likelihood of success would be there. So we need to keep running that rule over this, that we're looking for the likelihood of success. So we changed 6 to set the target, the measure as being 9 out of 10, and then looked for how we could reward and motivate this student to engage with an improved behaviour. Now, this young fella in particular had very few male role models in his life. So there was, for some reason, and I was the only male teacher in the school, so for some reason he had a little bit of an obsession with me and was always on my hip if I was on yard duty, and would miss the bus on a Friday afternoon in the hope that I would take him home from school. And so he was always craving that male attention. And he also had a particular like for Finding Nemo. So his chart, where if he stayed in a class for a lesson, had Finding Nemo all over it. We coloured in one of the fish every time the young bloke was able to stay in class. And then at the end of the week, if he may have been able to get to his target of 9, then he was able to go and get a friend to wheel the television into my office, and for 45 minutes at the end of Friday afternoon, he would watch Finding Nemo with his friend in my office in my presence, with me having a bit of a chat to them. That was hugely motivating for him, and certainly brought him into the plan. And as we started to get success, we were then able to use that 45-minute period to get in little conversations with him, and indeed even to be able to ask him, hey, what do you think next week's target should be? And he would tell us that he felt that target should go up to 10. And as he walked out the door, he turned around and looked at me with a bit of a grin and said, nah, make it 11. And so we started to get genuine improvement. Now, the great part about it from a whole plan perspective is that as he started to get right up to 13, 14, 15, we were then able to say, you know what, I think it's time to target a new behaviour. So this is like I said, the IBP flux capacitor. This is the middle of the whole thing, and but this is basically the reason that most other IBPs that you might have tried in the past, and templates and formats that have been developed, this is why they don't travel in time for you, because they miss this key ingredient of being able to take the target behaviour, look at what a measure of improvement would be, and then reward that measure. We also need to look at some long-term and broad strategy. So that means bringing in parent accountability. You know that when you have some of these conversations, you might have a child who, for instance, has a sight problem, and so you need to be careful about where you place them in the room and the kind of work that you give them. And you ask the parents if they've ever had their eyes tested. Oh no, I've thought about that. And so you might include in this section, that mum will go and book little Billy in for an eye test. And you'll get back together to review the plan, and I think you all know what the likelihood is about whether that eye test has happened or not. The great part is that upon that review, if you can just keep talking about that, you can maintain pressure on the parents to step into the plan. And that's really important. We want them on board. We want them active in the plan as well, because it'll contribute to the overall success. So I've had parents who have had eye tests and ear tests and things like that booked in for 5 incarnations of the plan, until we finally sat there and she's gone, oh, look, can you just give me the number and we'll call them now? And so she's rung up and got that test done. So it's about looking at, whether it is around even the example I used before about counselling. It's about whether we're taking a long-term view as well, and making sure that we're tracking this strategy towards our overall aim about where we want them to be in 3 to 5 years too. From here, we've sort of got our strategy organised, but we need to be mindful that an IBP is built around an improvement in frequency and severity of a target behaviour. It's not built around looking for perfection. And so we need to be really mindful that if we're talking about aggressive and violent behaviours in particular, that it's hugely important to prepare for the worst. Because while we might get an improvement in frequency and severity, that doesn't mean it's gone. And if we are getting an improvement in frequency and severity, then we know we're getting somewhere, and we're going to need to persist and get through a couple of roadblocks on the way when they come up. Just want to encourage you here to be really clear about what it is that you will do, particularly around aggressive or violent students, what it is that you will do when that happens. So if someone's going to touch them, it's really important that we are clear about who is going to touch them, how they're going to touch them, where they're going to take them, who's going to be called, and that plan is very much deprivatised, that others around the school know what that plan is. Hugely important stuff. Communication and distribution is important for here. There's all different types of methods these days that you can use to get the plan out and about, and also for the key stakeholders. And by the key stakeholders, I'm referring very much to the parent and the homeroom or pastoral care teacher. So it's a really, there's a myriad of ways that you can make sure that you stay in touch and that we're monitoring the plan and that we're seeing what the success markers are as they come along. It's also really important to have a think about who needs to see the plan. My default as a principal was to send the plan out via email to every staff member in the school, unless there was some sensitive information that needed to be managed effectively. So what I would do is have a think about that, think about who needs to be on the list, because look, the worst thing for teachers on duty sometimes is not knowing what the focus is in the classroom. So if it's someone that you're finding yourself butting heads with in the yard, but you don't have a lot of learning time to do with, and an IBP comes through for them, then you're more than likely going to have a bit of a look and see what the strategy is that we're working on, and that way they can focus their practice on yard duty also. So that's really important to be able to do that. I know a teacher that communicates with a parent via Twitter. She's the sort of parent who doesn't like phone calls, doesn't accept the phone calls when she sees the school's number appear on speed dial. She doesn't like emails because she doesn't answer them for 3 weeks, and then when she does, they're 3,000 words long. But if the teacher's able to send her a tweet, because she knows this is a parent that's a bit obsessed with social media, that just says, hey, give me a call between 3 and 5 this afternoon, need to have a quick chat, then mum has a moment to take a breath. She doesn't need to go and prepare a big long email, and that phone call works so much better, because we've just given that little bit of notice. So that's a really clever strategy that this teacher's employing. So think about how it is that you can communicate and distribute the plan. Important to sign off on the plan. One little thing that you might not know is that signing any document increases compliance and commitment to action in the plan by around about 40% in human beings. So any document that you build here that you can get people to sign, you reinforce the idea that this is something that needs to happen. And you reinforce that if they've made commitments about how often they're going to call the teacher or drop in for a chat or send a text message or whatever it is that we're going to communicate, that you reinforce the idea to the parent that we really need this to happen. It also reinforces and reminds us that this is an official document, and our behaviour in living up to this document is going to be really important too. And lastly, one of the last things that's really important that you need to do is to celebrate, which sounds like an odd thing to do because we rarely get the chance to celebrate with the parents of the students who drive us the craziest. So I just want to acknowledge at this point that if there are some parents in the audience today for this webinar, that you may yourselves have been, if you're like me, have received that call from a school to say that your child has done something wrong. And it's an awful call to take. And it's not a conversation that you're comfortable in. And if you head down to the school for an interview or a chat about what's happened, it's even more uncomfortable. We need to acknowledge that it takes some courage and it takes some discomfort for these parents to come down to the school and discuss in such detail the behaviour that their young person is demonstrating. It's gutsy, and we need to thank them and acknowledge them for that. So having a bicky or a cuppa and a glass of cordial can be a really valuable thing to do, and funnily enough, some of the best connections after that are made this way. So this is where we can reinforce some of that communication stuff over a coffee once we've got our plan built. So look, I just want to, that's probably the gist of the IBP. And like I said, I hope that it's, I hope that's really valuable to you, but I do very much view it as an oasis. And so what I wanted to do just for a minute is just show you how you can tend to the desert a bit too. This is an example of a couple of the resources that we provide to our members, and we've got many members on the webinar today. And so they get an article around teacher practice that sits under the thinking that you've experienced today, and they get an article for their leaders around cultural leadership. They also get a short video, a 3 to 4 minute video on which is called our staff meeting conversation starter, which prompts us around our practice and gives you something to have a chat about at staff meetings, so that you're perhaps not only talking about planning the next sports day and timetables, but you're getting some conversation in there about practice that can really make a difference in your school. So what I want to do is, if you think that might be valuable to your school, this one is $249, which is just for your school. And so if you think if just for your whole school has full reproducible rights to those articles. And so for 1 year, you'll be sent those resources. If you think that might be beneficial to your school, just jump in that question area that you've got available to you there. And if you just write the word membership, I'm going to follow up with you individually and make sure that you get the chance to start getting those resources straight away. And indeed, anyone who writes the word membership today, even if you don't sign up as a member, I'm going to send you the July resources also, so that you can have a bit of a look at those. But look, the gist of what Real Schools is all about is about taking some of this thinking and allowing you to become a partner, and indeed to tend to the desert, to do some work around the oasis, so that hopefully you don't need the oasis quite as often. And I'm delighted that we've got about 35 schools now around Australia who have jumped on as partners and are working together over an extended period of time. I'm really mindful that while today might be a really worthwhile oasis for you, it isn't going to change your school. And it's only through partnership and through working together over an extended period of time that can happen. So thank you to our partners who are here today and for enduring a couple of minutes here. But step one is about looking at which theme it is that we need to work on to be able to get some improvement in your school, whether it's cultural leadership, whether it's behaviour management, which is really about awesome teacher practice that motivates and that highlights a high level of engagement, or whether it's around restorative practices, then we can get to work in assisting your school. We've got 55% of our partnerships these days around restorative practices, which is really exciting. It's about looking at what you need to do to get your partnership going, and whether you're going to work together for 12, 24 or 36 months to get the changes and to sustain the changes that you're looking for. And then it's about getting to work. So we provide professional learning for your people. We come into classrooms. We won't sign on with a school that won't let us into the classrooms and work with the kids where you're trying to make the changes. And so we come and work with you in class and show you how you can get somewhere with that. And we also mentor your leaders who've got to build an implementation plan to get some changes. We do some targeted teacher coaching. So where this is all working nicely, but our Year 4 students are driving us crazy, then we'll work with those Year 4 students to help them get over that practice barrier. We run a parent information session. We ran one last week up at Swan Hill Primary School, which was really well attended and received, which is great. We've had 7 or 8 parents from that night who have emailed us directly and asked us for the presentation because they'd like to send it to other parents, which is really exciting. And we provide unlimited email support along the way and unlimited phone support. So I get teachers from all over Australia sending me emails and giving me making calls to me, which is really exciting. So if that's something that appeals to you, then just grab that question section again and write the word partnership. And this is a partnership is not something that I'm going to send you an invoice for straight away, so don't panic about that at all. Partnership means that by writing the word partnership in the question box, that means that you would like me to give you a call or drop you an email and see if we can have a conversation. So it's a no obligation conversation about how we might be able to provide service to your school over an extensive period of time. And look, the last thing I want to do is to let you know we've got another webinar coming up. So when we talk about today working on the oasis, and oasis are really important when you're doing it tough with some of these really challenging students. But the next webinar that we're going to run together is around what is a school culture, and we're going to run that one on Thursday, 18th of September at 3:30. So this one's really targeted at our principals, our assistant principals, our lead teachers, and also our aspiring leaders in schools. So if you're thinking about stepping into leadership in your school, I'd like to really encourage you to think about jumping on this webinar. That's another freebie. So there's absolutely there's no charge for you to get involved in this one. And if you'd like to register for that one, registrations are certainly now open, and we'll make sure you get a follow-up email from today as well. So with that link in there too. So thank you so much for joining in today. I'm just going to go to the next screen here that's going to have our contact details if you would like to get in touch. We do have, by my timing anyway, about 5 or 6 minutes up our sleeve. So if you do have a question, or if you or if you would like to put your hand up. I'm noticing I've got a couple of people with hands up right now, but it may be because they were up from earlier on. Margaret and Helen have hands up at the moment. So if you do have a question, or if you would like to put your hand up and I can unmute you to ask a question, then fire away. I'll just see how we go for a minute. See, Helen's put her hand down now. Well done, Helen. Jenny, you've got your hand up. Okay, so Jenny, I'm going to go to you. No, Jenny's got yes, Jenny does have her hand up. Jenny, I'm going to go to you and unmute you now and just give you the opportunity to ask your question. How are you, Jenny?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Fire away, Jenny.
My problem is probably the parent of the child that I have in my classroom. The parent is very aggressive and very unreasonable and very, very difficult to work with. How do I go? What do I do? How do I approach this?
Yeah, the good part is, I guess, what we want to do first up is to arrange the IBP meeting with that parent at a time when it's not, because I'm ringing you up because there's been another aggressive problem in the playground, and by the way, we'd like to run an IBP. So what we want to do is to frame it for this parent that, actually we share your frustration. We've just been thinking about it, and we think that this isn't working, what we're doing, and that what we'd like to do is work together and start again. See if we can get a good plan in place, but we also want to acknowledge that we can't build the plan without you. So what do you reckon? Could we get someone, external? Someone who, not the classroom teacher. So you might get an assistant principal or someone to facilitate that meeting, and then you and the classroom teacher can sit down and just tell us what you think's going on, and they can just have that conversation that the facilitator records in the plan. So my big advice around that would be pick a time when they haven't had a bad day to approach them about it, and then frame it very much as a fresh start. The first IBP meeting that you have should take you somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes. So don't let it become a big, horrible 3-hour meeting. And then any review of an IBP should take 30 to 45 minutes if the facilitator's doing their job. Right. So we want to make sure that it's easily reviewed. I mentioned earlier before also looking at how often you should get together, when you should review. My default is about 5 weeks. And that's a good enough time to get a honeymoon period. It's a good enough time to get a good base of evidence about whether this is working or not. And then after that, we'll sit down and have another chat. So the first meeting can be a bit clunky, a bit awkward, a bit uncomfortable. And then after that, we'll find that if we're really clear about the way it goes, if we have a cuppa after it, if we're following through on the communication plan that we've set, that we start to get slowly scaffolded, better levels of engagement from the parent. But I hear you, Jenny, because it can be a really tough place to start.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
No problem. I'll mute you back on again now, Jenny. All right. Okay. And look, everyone, I'll finish things up there because we are pretty much out of time now. But look, I just want to thank you all for coming on board. If there is anything else you'd like to talk to us about at Real Schools and how we can serve your school better, then please make sure you use the contact details that are on the screen now. We're going to send you a follow-up email. We've recorded the session today, so this isn't something that we want to keep private and special. We're going to upload this webinar onto YouTube. We're going to send you the link for that so that you can have access to that and you can show other people in your school, and make sure that you register for that next webinar in September, which will be about defining and working on what a school culture is. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. I'll finish up there and we'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye for now.